The whole Liam Kumar Day effect, not really happy.
Nigel couldn't make it.
Yeah.
I've recommended him all, he said he could make it.
Don't dig this hole. Phil, credit to the guy, he always manages to do well what he has to. He is a shocking personality. You guys got a trophy? No.
It was pre-vip.
No. My life from Rashad Mendes.
Right, you go. I'm a tag, Jack! I'm a fucking tag!
Hello and welcome to another episode of the LOC Report. It is a Christmas Eve edition of the podcast, no less. So, aren't you so lucky? What better present could you get for the holidays other than a playoff edition of the LOC Report? Unfortunately, as you can see, Chris is not here. Unfortunately, he was a bit busy getting his final bits sorted before he went on holiday. I say on holiday, before he begins his grand adventure. So, unfortunately, he couldn't join us today as we'd hoped he would last week. But that's okay. We've still got a great pod for you. And I'm not going to delay any further. You're probably busy with Christmas Day wrapping presents and stuff, so I'm not going to take up too much of your time. Here we go. We'll dive straight into it with the recap of the wildcard bowl. Bucking the Trend and Bedetonators took each other on in the wildcard bowl. Bucking the Trend being the traditional wildcard team with a 10-4 record, playing against Bedetonators, who had the second highest amount of points in the league. And earned the highest points playoff berth as a result. It was a closely contested affair between these two. In the previous meeting, the Detonators lost this one narrowly, 100.18 to 100.88. Wasn't quite as close this time around, but Ollie, unfortunately, once again did lose to Mike to the tune of 92 to 46. Looking down the lineups for Mike, Tua came through with 21 points for him. Saquon Barkley came up big with 18. Josh Jacobs got 10, and the special teams, Brett Mayer with 12, and the Steelers D with 10 points, getting them to that 92 points. The other skill positions not doing too badly either. On the other side of the board for Ollie's team, kind of a similar output, I guess you could say. Justin Fields, he got 26, CeeDee Lamb got 13, Derrick Henry got 21 points, no other players above 10 though, and you can see there are a couple of low scorers there, which was ultimately the difference in this game for Ollie, and obviously conspired for him to lose this one. So Ollie is eliminated from playoff contention. Mike does win the wildcard bowl and will go on to face Iksan in the semi-finals. The history of this matchup all time now, that's 2 on the trot. Obviously, this season for Mike is on the sweep over Ollie. His record of time against Ollie is now 4-2. So yeah, a good win there for Mike. Myself and Chris both picked Ollie to win this one, and it was a fairly close one to be fair, but just didn't come through. Let's start on Ollie's side to begin with. The guys you expected to turn up did: Justin Fields, CeeDee Lamb, Derrick Henry. Those guys all performed as you would expect. It was just other things around that just let Ollie down, unfortunately, this week. This was obviously a winnable game, a good score by Mike, but certainly nothing world-beating. And you look at the guys like Chris Olave, who I think he may have even left the game injured, as he's obviously out now with a hamstring injury, but didn't have a great day all the same either, with just 5 points. He's been a guy that's Ollie's leaned on a lot this season. Dante Foreman with a big fat 0 points. As it was pointed out in the LOC chat, he's been very up and down scoring-wise, and this was one of his down weeks. If you follow the trend, it does go up and down. But again, just an unfortunate time for Ollie to have that happen to him. Chuba Hubbard got in a bit more. I think even the Panthers' third running back actually got into the end zone in this game as well. So just an odd game. The Panthers were always behind in this one as well, which didn't help his game flow. He is very much an early downs back. He's not a shifty receiving back. Even Isaiah Pacheco to a degree in a really plum matchup, only getting 8 points. Obviously, Jarrett McKinnon we see had a really good day again. And then the special teams, just that was really the difference in this game if you look between the two. Daniel Carson, typically a player who's been solid all year long. 7 points, that's okay, but you look on the other side, Brett Mayer got 12. And then the defenses, we had a defense off in this game. Not sure why these two decided to have a defense off between the Steelers and the Panthers. That seems like a ill-advised decision to me. For Mike, obviously it came off okay, but for Ollie, and to be fair, Panthers D have been a pretty good unit ever since Steve Wilkes took over as head coach there. Pittsburgh on paper a fairly good matchup, certainly with Mitch Trubisky playing, because Kenny Pickett was out of this one with a concussion, only coming up with the 2 points there. Again, you can see that is pretty much the margin of the difference here, so really unfortunate for Ollie. You look to the bench, you have Travis Etienne, who got 11 points, but again, he's been a guy that's been been really dodgy of late as well. You do play him over Foreman, and Ollie does get the win narrowly in this one, however, so you do have to look at that. But I'm not going to be too hard on Ollie. It's just unfortunate how it turned out for him. Didn't quite have the points on the day. But then we looked at the other side of the board for Mike. Sticking with Tua in the very adverse weather there in Buffalo. Still came through with 21 points, so a fairly good decision. He did have Lawrence on the bench, but again, I'm not going to ding him for making that decision. We know with hindsight now that Lawrence is kind of, and the Jags offense as a whole really have kind of taken it to the next level, but at the time it was still kind of in question what the Jags would turn up, so I don't mind that decision, and obviously 21 points is solid, not too different from Justin Fields on the other side. Saquon Barkley, his faith has been rewarded in him once again. He hasn't looked great, hasn't been getting the same points that he was earlier in the season for Mike's team, but in a tough matchup came through here in a game where the Giants found themselves in a fairly good game script all game long. Josh Jacobs as well, obviously he's been a workhorse despite a fairly tough matchup on paper. He had a solid day. And then, we'll come back to the special teams and the defense. Brett Maher, good kicker again for Dallas. He obviously came through with some good points there. Steelers against the Panthers. We've been questioning why Mike had been sticking with the Steelers defense so much, because they're not a particularly good unit. But the Panthers obviously weren't particularly great on offense, so it did come off. He could have played the Bucks, which would have been bold against Cincy, might I add. And the result would have been the same. Even the Commanders didn't do too badly as well, but he got the right choice out of the three of them, so credit to him. And then even the supporting guys didn't do too badly here. Keenan Allen, obviously he's been a boon for him getting healthy again, 8.6 points. Same for Ross St. Brown, chipping in with 8.2. Christian Watson was the lowest performer for him, only 5 points there on the day, but it is what it is. Mike gets the win all the same, and again you look to the bench, no one else he could have really turned to. He could have played DeAndre Swift, but I completely understand his reasons for not doing that. So yeah, a solid day for Mike. Mike's first playoff win no less, so congratulations there, Mike, and you obviously move on to the next round in the playoffs. So we will go to the league news now before we obviously get on to the semi-final previews. So with only 4 teams left, obviously the news section is a bit lighter, but we have a little something just to add a bit of intrigue there and extend the session a bit further. So key injuries though, Tyler Lockett for Ixan. He broke his hand in week 15, unfortunately on Ixan's bye week. If only Tyler Lockett had a bye week as well right then. He is going to miss this week's game, but could potentially be back for as early as next week. So he's obviously been a guy Ben's counted on all year long, so he'll be definitely hoping he can get healthy, assuming he makes it through in this week's matchup against Mike. And then also for my team, Kenneth Walker, he did suffer an injury a couple of weeks ago, missed the game, I think it was in week 14, but came back and played in week 15 there, but bizarrely coming out of that, and that was the Thursday night game as well, didn't practice at all this week. He's listed as a questionable and still expected to play despite that, but listed with a ankle and back injuries, so don't know if it was an aggravation in the game. There's talk that he kind of fled up with back spasms at some point, so it's been a very odd one, and typically you don't see a player suit up when they didn't participate in practice at all week long, but obviously the Seahawks are fighting for their playoff life. He's obviously a big part of my team. We'll come on to that in the matchup a bit later on, so I'll certainly be hoping that he does suit up there. For transactions, there was no one in particular transaction that jumped out to me, but we'll cover it off when we get to the Ixan versus bucking the trend game. These two teams basically changed out their entire their entire benches. Here, you see Mike with the addition of Zay Jones there, dropping obviously he was carrying a couple of defenses, makes sense. But he also added Adam Thielen, George Kittle, and Marquise Goodwin. So I picked up 4 players this week on the free agency, and then I think Ben as well. He changed out a couple of guys there. You see Mac Hollins, he added. He also added KJ Osborne there as well. So quite a bit of movement among the playoff teams. And obviously you can see my team's popping up a bit there as well. Nothing particularly interesting. Obviously at this stage of the season you don't really find a guy on the waivers unless there's some sort of injury that would lead them to be valuable, but yeah, interesting all the same. Standing stats and milestones, so yeah, I mentioned it. So Coach Taylor in his first playoff appearance, he notched his first playoff win, so congrats to you there, Mike. And then we have no more news for you as such, but obviously the end of the regular season, what does that bring? LOC awards season. So we as a committee have put together the award nominees, which I'll read to you shortly, and then we'll obviously announce the winners of the awards either on next week's show or the final show of the season after that. So we'll start from top to bottom with the Commissioner's Awards. So this one's entirely down to me, and obviously it's for stuff kind of around the league, not necessarily to do with the performance on the field, so to speak, but elsewhere in the league. So we've got Chris nominated for this once again, obviously as the co-host on the podcast and operating as the league ombudsman. We've got Tom as well as the E.Locker, and obviously the author of the Power Rankings article as well, which we all look forward to each week. We also have Ross nominated for the Commissioner's Award with his great team names. They have been particularly good this year. I did love, in fact, the category of video games, so definitely worthy of a nomination here. And we have Phil also nominated here. He was obviously the exec on my team exec on Gridiron Gang. He has been quite helpful just to bounce ideas off of all season long since the draft for me. So again, all nominees for that award. Then we have the Luck Award. So that's the award for something that's kind of gone in the team's favour. They've been a bit lucky for one reason or another at times. I will explain each of the nominees here. So for Pat, he obviously went 7-7 but won the division. He was a bit lucky with that soft division there. Obviously with the best record behind him being 4-10, probably the easiest division you'll ever see in the LOC. Breakdown wise, he was only just over 500 as well. You can see there 80-74. So again, being one of the playoff teams, when you can see that there is a team that went 92-62 in breakdown, which did not make the playoffs here. So I was quite fortunate in that regard as well. Where are we? We also have Mike with the Luck Awards. So he had the lowest conceded points in the league this year, the only team to concede less than 1,200 points. You can see there 11.74.5. So he got very lucky with that regard. As such, he was fairly low in the breakdown record as well. His points weren't bad. I'll qualify that with his team has still been obviously fairly good. Obviously dealt with some injuries as well. But again, the breakdown at 8-4-70, not awful. It's above 500. But again, there are teams, you can see 3 teams above him, in fact, with a better breakdown record that did not make the playoffs. So there was just a tinge of luck there. But he didn't really have any gypsy wins this year, to be fair to Mike. He might have had the odd one or two. But just a bit lucky, obviously, over the course of the season, seeing the lowest conceded points. Ollie Garner Beddoes as well, you're up for the Luck Award, which seems weird when you say you have a 4-10 record. But let's not forget he was leading the division for much of this season, despite only finishing with 4 wins. Also had the second lowest points ever in an LLC season, yet still came out with 4 wins there as well, obviously, and had the chance of winning a division for quite a number of time. So he was also 39 and 115 in the breakdown at the bottom there, but again, still had that chance at the playoffs for quite a while. So it was obviously fortunate that he was in it for as long as he was as well. And then I think that's everyone for the Luck Award. So we've got the Overachiever Award next. So for the team that kind of exceeded expectations, overcame some adversity to have the kind of season they did. The first nominee we have here is Viv's team, went 7-7, but he was actually 3-7 before entering the closing stage of the season. So I think, he did have a fairly negative record at one point. So as you can see, 4 wins on the bounce there. He also dealt with quite a number of injuries. We know he lost Chase at a time. Was also like the non-RB heaviest team in the league. So I think only Tony Pollard really featured for him at the running back position all year long. He really did do quite well to certainly get back to 7-7, and even he was still alive for quite some time in the points forward wildcard spot as well. So Viv did really have a good year this year, despite the final record. We also have Ixan as the Overachiever Award. Ixan with probably the most unsexiest 11-3 team you will ever see, but he just gets it done year after year. Ben obviously won the regular season championship this year, 11-3, great performance by him. But obviously on the back of a solid draft. So I would say though, coming into the season, you wouldn't have necessarily predicted that team being the regular season winner, having an 11-3 record, but Ben did a great job with all of that. And then we also have Napolitans, so he went 6-8, but conceded over 1,400 points, the only team to be above 1,400 points. You can see looking down there quite a few teams having in the 1,200 kind of range, even some in the 1,100 range. Correction on the Mike's one for the Luck Award as well. Chris was the lowest scoring team. He was the second lowest scorer, but it wasn't much between them. But yeah, no, back to Dave's team. He still had a good points. He overcame that, obviously, the high points scored against to have a 6-8 record, and even in the breakdown, he was pretty good as well, 86 and 68. Despite being scored on a ton, so he did well to get to that record. And then, do we have one more for the Overachiever Award? Yeah, we have Tom's Tyrants as well. Tom obviously looked completely washed at one point. He was winless through 7 games, but obviously came back to actually stay alive in the playoff race for nearly up to the final week. And obviously won 4 games down the stretch as well to kind of reverse his fortunes. So he did a great job to turn it around, obviously with a fairly weak team at times and limited resources at his disposal there. The next award we have is the Comeback Award. So this is for either a comeback from a bad previous year or previous years, or an in-season turnaround to come back and finish strong. So we have Ollie Bidette nominated for here firstly. So we obviously had quite a notably low start this year. It did not look like a good team through the first couple of weeks. The scoring was very, very low, but all of that was for naught. He obviously came back to make the playoffs. He finished with an 8-6 record. He finished with the second highest scoring team. Had the league started a few weeks later, no doubt he would have been 8-4 effectively, would have had the highest scoring team. So he really did have quite the comeback. He was also coming back from a 5-9 record last year, so kind of carried that a little bit into the start of this year, but really did turn it around. So well done to you, Ollie. And obviously made the playoffs with the highest scoring team among non-seeded teams. Padistan, so again, Padistan, Pat was 3-7 entering the last month of the regular season. Obviously turned it on when it mattered, won 4 straight to seal up the division and make the playoffs. Again, also coming off a 5-9 record last year, so good comeback effort by Pat, which obviously spilled quite into the first half of this year until he turned it on near the end. We also have, who else we got here? We've also got me nominated for this one. This is my first playoff appearance and my first winning record since 2017, so that's obviously quite the time. So a comeback from multiple years of pain, you would say, and obviously it was quite a good year for me as well. High scoring team there, a 9-5 record. My first ever division win as well, making the playoffs. And then we're on to the key awards here. We've got GM of the year. So again, I'm nominated for that one. I conducted 3 trades this year. I led the league in roster moves again. I spent the most amount of waiver money ever. I nailed the top half of my draft, and the latter half of my draft was okay as well. I obviously made some crucial free agent additions along the way, like Kenneth Walker, where I've lost my place on my little note here. Good team depth all year long, obviously highest in points forward, and then in the coach score I left a fair amount of points on the bench as well, so again that just shows the good depth that my team did have from a solid GM performance this year. We also have, where are we on here? I cannot see. Ollie Bidette, again, he's nominated here as well. So despite the slow start, it was a slow burner to a degree because his draft was really strong from top to bottom. Obviously, the team caught fire at one point and was the hottest team in the LOC at one point. He picked up 2 waiver quarterbacks. He whiffed a bit in the draft on Russell Wilson at a lower pick, but he absolutely made up for it by picking up Justin Fields and Geno Smith, so great job there. It's really hard to get 1, let alone 2 solid quarterbacks off the waiver during the season. He was also 3rd in roster moves overall, the 2nd highest scoring team as well, obviously. And made some really good additions as well along the way, like Dante Foreman. So well done to you, Ollie. Mike, you're also up for the GM of the Year award. Had a solid draft. You had a handful of good waiver ads. You were obviously juggling injuries for much of the season. I think for multiple times. Pretty much your entire bench was injured, so it's really tough to operate as a GM in that, because you haven't got as many bench spots available, but you obviously need to field a competitive team, and obviously you still wound up having 10 wins and making the playoffs for the first time. So good, and obviously made a trade as well at one point. Not that the trade really worked out for him, but still made a trade. And then we also have Ben up for this as well. Just a solid draft that has propelled the team all year long to that 11-3 record. Obviously took some players that other people weren't as interested in, but Ben obviously saw through it. He knows what he's doing. He's frequently nominated for this award and has definitely won it at least once or twice as well. And also conducted a trade there at one point. The one little knock on Ben, the depth has never been flush for his team. He's always fielded a good starting lineup, but the depth hasn't always been there. but still a solid year despite that. And the final award, Coach of the Year. So again, I'm up for this one. Again, with the highest scoring team, I had the best breakdown record this year, the only team to go over 100 wins across the season. 109 and 45 was my final record there. I won the division, the first division win of my career. Obviously, I've made numerous streams along the way. I've juggled some injuries as well. I conceded a fair amount of points, so I also had that to contend with. Obviously, there was the poor coach stat working against me, but that there was an element of the depth being the reason for the coach score there. We also have Ben nominated for this award, obviously the regular season title, a good coach score. I think he was second in the coach score. He was second in breakdown behind me, nearly got to 100 wins. He was at 99. Obviously had the toughest division as well, having a 10 and 4, a 9 and 5 and a 6 and 8 team contending with him as well, all of which were good teams by the way. So really good job by Ben there. Mike as well, his best career record is 10 and 4, first double digit win season. Made some good pickups, obviously, as I said, overcame the injuries. He did have a poor coach score and obviously had the low conceded points, so that does work against him a bit. But again, still, I say poor coach score, it was middle of the road coach score. But still a good season by Mike. And then the final nominee for this is my dad, Dave. He was a lock for playoffs at one point. This team came absolutely out of the gate. It was kind of his GMing that let him down a bit down the stretch. He didn't really make many ads through the season. The team kind of lost its steam. He did go 9 and 5, which in any other year in the LOC would have been a playoff record, or would always be a playoff record. The first time a 9 and 5 team hasn't made the playoffs. He had a good breakdown record as well, and he was first in coach score. So those are all of your nominees there. As I say, we will come back and award those awards in the next couple of weeks. Before we go on to the previews, we next have Debate Corner. So for that, obviously, I need to find John. He is wrapping up his Christmas presents. I'll see if I can put him away. John, can you please usher us into the Debate Corner?
Order!
Thank you, John. So for Debate Corner this week, obviously it's the Christmas Eve edition of the LOC Report. So would be a criminal if we didn't tie it into Christmas somehow. And as we all know from a very famous Christmas song, the weather outside is frightful, but the fire is so delightful. That could not be more true in the LOC and in the NFL this week, because there are some horrendous weather games on the docket this week in outdoor stadiums. But obviously, if you're in that dome there, you don't have to worry about the weather at all. It's business as usual. But the Debate Corner question for this week is, will weather cause a team to lose in the semi-finals? So there is an argument that, you know, in certain conditions you should absolutely bench certain players. If it's really windy, it makes it really difficult for quarterbacks to complete passes. It obviously puts more of an onus on the run game. It just makes the conditions much harder. Same if it's like really wet and rainy and windy. We kind of saw that in the Thursday night game where it wasn't too bad to start with, but the rain really and the howling weather kind of picked up as it went along. When it's really cold, that obviously has an impact as well. There is a bomb cyclone hitting the US at the moment, if you've seen that in the news, creating some really, really crazy weather for some outdoor teams. And you know what? The answer to this question, will a team lose in the playoffs because of weather? I think it's certainly possible, because there are a number of teams, which we'll go through in the previews in a second, who have key players who you can't bench your studs at this point, just, you know, based on something like that. And these kind of players can overcome the weather, but it's absolutely not a guarantee, and it could really be something that does impact a game potentially. So I'm going to go out and say that one of these games, decided potentially not. It's obviously hard to judge but it's going to have definitely an impact and could potentially cause the team to lose in the playoffs here. So we'll delay no further, as I know you've got things to do on your Christmas Day, time to spend with the family as well. So we'll get into the previews. So this week in the semi-finals, we have Gridiron Gang against Pakistan, which is the two division winners of the Portsmouth division and the Winchester division facing off. And we also have Ixane against Bucking the Trend. That is where we will start. They shared the division, the Southampton division. They obviously Mike came through the wildcard bowl, the quarterfinals to visit Ben again, and Ben obviously won the regular season title, earned the bye. So we will get into it here and preview this game. Iksan take on Bucking the Trend here in the first of the semi-finals of the 2022 LFC playoffs. A trip to the Corona Bowl 14 is on the line for these two. 11-3 Iksan facing off 10-4 Bucking the Trend, Southampton Division compatriots. Mike will be looking for his second ever playoff win and his first appearance in the Corona Bowl. He would be the first of the new wave coaches to make the Corona Bowl if he wins this one. By new wave, I mean coaches that have joined since 2014. None of those coaches have made a Corona Bowl as yet. Meanwhile, for Ben, he's looking to make his 5th Corona Bowl appearance, which would be an all-time record. He would stand alone in Corona Bowl appearances if he got there. And it would also be his 3rd appearance in the last 4 years if he made it, which would be the best among active coaches. Only Nigel's done one better than that, who went to 3 straight between Corona Bowl 7 to 9. He would also become the all-time leader in playoff wins if he wins this game as well, so a lot on the line here for Ben. The previous matchup between these two, they had 2. Ben won both of them coming in week 4 there and week 14. You can see there in both games, obviously you can see Mike didn't have a great score there. The projections in this one, Ben is projected to win, he's projected to lose it marginally. It's very, very close though, 94.81 to 94.61. If we take a look down the lineups here, we'll start off with Mike's team. So I believe he has brought DeAndre Swift into the lineup, dropping Christian Watson to the bench. I believe that is his only change, so he is fielding the 30 personnel this week. The Wishbone, 3 running backs and 2 wide receivers. On the other side of the board for Iksan, let's see here, he brings KJ Osborne into the lineup. That might be his only change. I can't remember what his lineup was there in week 14. Jarrett McKinnon comes into the line as well as a strong possibility. He's brought him in as well, and that is dropping Tyler Lockett, who would have appeared from the last time out, to the bench, who got injured in week 15, and I think probably Deebo Samuel as well, who I think was injured in week 14 there. So Ben is going with the 30 personnel as well, 3 running backs, the Wishbone and 2 wide receivers. The history of this matchup all time, Mike is 1-5 all time against Iksan, so he's going to have to overcome the odds despite having the projections on his side. Let's start by looking at Mike's team here. Let's take a look down. We've got 2 playing at home against Packers. I like that. The weakness of the defense is the run defense, but obviously the Dolphins offense just has been really good to us. Been playing really well all the year long. We've got Keenan Allen against Indy. That's a fairly good matchup as well. I think they're a bit light in the secondary this time around. He will have to contend with Stephon Gilmore, which isn't the easiest matchup, but on paper it should be a fairly good matchup. And Amon-Ra St. Brown against Carolina. Again, he'll be going up probably against JC Horn. It's not a bad defense, but again, he should still do well. You do have to worry. What do we see from the Lions away from home? It's Jared Goff versus Jared Goff with his home and away splits, but we'll see here. Saquon Barkley against Minnesota. Providing they don't fall behind too early, as long as they can stay in the game, Barkley should have a solid one here. The Vikings defense isn't the best, so he's set up fairly well there. For Josh Jacobs as well against Pittsburgh. We did see Pittsburgh shut down the Panthers' run game a bit last week, but again, you know, they're not the best defense around. Josh Jacobs is obviously the workhorse for that team. It's going to be a cold weather game. It's going to be one of those games that I mentioned that could potentially be impacted by the weather. So maybe they'll lean on Josh Jacobs a little more as a result. But he's obviously been great for Mike all year long. He's also going with DeAndre Swift here. It's a tricky one because you don't know how many touches he's going to get. You don't know what he's going to do with those touches. But I completely understand Mike's reason for throwing him in here, because he should at least get you some yards with a chance of a touchdown. When you look to Mike's bench, there isn't anyone I would confidently say you would pick over him. Wise decision not playing Zay Jones there on Thursday night, as that was a tough matchup, as well as being fairly bad weather in that game as well. So I don't mind that play at all. And then we've got the special teams, Brett Maher against Philly. That should be fairly good. Obviously with Jalen Hurts out, that's more likely that's going to be a close game between those two. And then Buccaneers against Arizona defense, who is starting Trace McSorley. The Bucs defense, they're missing Vita Vea again. James Conner is the worry, who's on the other side of the board. We'll come back to him. But you would hope the Buccaneers could have a really good day against a 3rd string quarterback and an Arizona team that's just kind of unraveling at the moment. So Mike's set up fairly well. It's not perfect. But he's looking pretty good measure, I would say, for his points and things this week. On the other side of the board, Patrick Mahomes against Seattle. That is going to be a really cold weather game there in Kansas City as well, but it's Pat Mahomes. He plays in Kansas. He knows what it's like. He's done this a few times before, so he's going to be absolutely fine. He could have a good day against Seattle. Cooper against New Orleans. I absolutely hate it. I would be taking him out of my lineup if I was Ben, to be quite honest with you. The weather in that Cleveland New Orleans game proves to be pretty biblically bad. Not just really cold, but the wind is absolutely horrendous as well. It's going to make it really difficult in the passing game. Cooper hasn't shown a good connection with Watson so far, and Watson's obviously not played that great himself either, so I do not like that from Ben. KJ Osborne with Minnesota against the Giants as well. He obviously had that massive week last week, but it really depends, can we count on Kirk Cousins to throw for over 400 yards again? They've got so many weapons in this offense as well to contend with. It was Osborne's day, obviously, last week. There's no guarantee it's going to be him. It could be Thielen, obviously Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson. They've obviously got good running backs there as well. I don't know. It feels risky to me. I get it. I completely understand it from Ben's point of view. Maybe Osborne is kind of emerging as that second option behind Jefferson because Thielen's not had a great year this year either. But I don't know. It's bold. Jeremy McKinnon as well. I like that. He's obviously been great. He could potentially be a league winner for Ben should he continue the recent run he's had. But has there been an element of luck to it? I don't know. He has been good. Against Seattle, the profiles is a good matchup as well. But we all know with this Chiefs offense that the touchdowns can be spread all over the place. But they do like Jerick McKinnon, and they are getting to the point near the playoffs, and they have been keeping him a bit in bubble wrap all year long. They are starting to unwrap that a bit. So again, I completely get why Ben's playing him. James Conner against Tampa Bay. I mean, if Arizona are going to do anything on offense, it's got to be through James Conner. He should profile to have a good day without Vita Vea there. That profiles to make it an easier matchup. The Bengals did struggle quite a bit to run against Buccaneers in the same situation last week. So you will be thinking the Bucs are just going to say, right, let's just stop this run game and make Trace McSorley beat us. We'll see what happens. And then you've got McCaffrey at home. It is a fairly stout Washington run defense, but we obviously saw in the recap of Mike's game last week that Barkley had a good day. We know this Niners offense is good as well. Certainly with Brock Purdy, they're going to be leaning on that run game, so he should still be fine. And then we have Justin Tucker and the Ravens against Atlanta. It's a tough one because Atlanta are not great on offense. If you watched any of the Saints-Atlanta game last week, I had Drake London on my bench, so I had an interest to see how they were doing. Desmond Ridder looked awful. He was terrible. He was literally running into sacks, couldn't do anything in the pass game really. But the Ravens, they're at home. It's going to be cold. It's not going to be bad weather. It's just going to be cold. But they're going to be without Calais Campbell. They're going to be without Marcus Peters. Does that make a difference? I don't know. Can Arthur Smith cook something up? Are they going to lean on the run? Typically, they're good against the run, certainly since they picked up Roquan Smith. But without Calais Campbell there, does the run defense soften a bit? We obviously know Atlanta like to run. It's a tricky one for me. I don't know. There's probably not a better option. Well, maybe there is a better option. I don't know. It's a tough one for me. That one could go either way. Justin Tucker as well. It's obviously been a very, very solid kicker. He missed a couple uncharacteristically last week, but that was a bit of weird weather in that Browns-Ravens game as well last week. But this offense just is not clicking at the moment. They are completely barren of weapons. They're playing, obviously, with their backup quarterback at the moment, who he's been okay, but it's a risk against this Atlanta defense. They're one of these units that's sneakily not awful. They're not great, but they're not necessarily terrible. I don't know. There's a lot to question with Ben's team this week. And obviously I mentioned a couple of guys potentially that maybe Ben shouldn't be playing. You look to the bench as well, and this comes back to what I've mentioned it in previous weeks and in the nomination for the GM of the Year award again. He isn't flush with depth there. I don't think any of those options you can see there. Antonio Gibson going against San Fran. He might have game script in his favour. Profile speed game for him over Brian Robinson, especially because he did out-touch Brian Robinson. Sorry, he out-snapped Brian Robinson in last week's game as well. Mike Hollins, no idea what you're going to get. Obviously, the cupboard is full again in terms of weapons with Waller and Renfro being back there. It's going to be a cold weather game. Derek Carr historically sucks in cold weather when it goes below 40 Fahrenheit. Yeah, I don't think he's an option in T.Y. Hilton. It's going to be his first active game for the Cowboys. But where does he fit into this offense behind Ceedee, behind Michael Gallup, even Noah Brown, Dalton Schultz, the Titans? I can't see a role from him. So I think Ben is in between a real rock and a hard place with some of his choices this week. And you know what? I hate to say it, but I think I'm going to go with Mike's team because of it. And I'm actually going to lock up Mike's team. We've got 2 games, so we can do locks this week. Because even though Mike's team it's not a perfect setup, it's not the best. Some of the players I mentioned there is some doubt in there, but it looks like a solid team. And for every guy that might have a disappointing day, there could equally be a guy on his team that offsets it with a great day. Whereas you look at Ben's team, he's going to be relying on Mahomes for sure and McCaffrey, and then he's just got to hope that a couple of the other guys stand up. I can't see Cooper really doing anything in that game. Obviously, Obaspawn could disappear, as I mentioned, and I don't know. It just profiles as a win here for bucking the trend, so I'm going with bucking the trend in this one. We'll go to the other semi-final game now then, which features Gridiron Gang and Pakistan. Gridiron Gang takes on Pakistan here in the other semi-final matchup of this week. The two division winners, 9-5 Gridiron Gang in the Portsmouth division, the high-scoring team taking on Pakistan, who had the good hot streak to end the year, carrying some form into the playoffs with 7-7 and winning that Winchester division title. Pat is looking for his first Corona Bowl appearance and his first playoff win as well. He's been 0-3 in the playoffs so far when he's made it. So again, like Mike, he'd be the first new wave coach to make the Corona Bowl if he does get through. Whereas for my team, I'm looking to make my first Corona Bowl appearance since 2011. If I got to the Corona Bowl, that would be the longest gap between Corona Bowl appearances ever. So obviously a lot on the line for me here as well. I am projected to win this one 95-78. So let's take a look down the lineups, and actually before we do that, let's look at the last matchup between these two earlier in the season. It was when Joe Mixon went for that 50-point game. I won it 142-98. Obviously, Devontae Adams and Justin Jefferson having a good day for Pat that day as well. So that was the first matchup. And I've got the projection to win. Looking down the lineups from my team, Kenneth Walker comes back into the lineup for me, dropping, I can't remember who I was playing in week 14. I think it was Donovan Peoples-Jones to the bench. I think I'm probably playing Rashad White over Brian Robinson as well. I can't quite remember who I was playing, but I'm going with the three running backs and the two wide receivers. Three running backs, 31 personnel, so the wishbone with the tight end and a wide receiver. On the other side of the board for Pakistan, again, last time he appeared, I don't think he had Garrett Wilson in his lineup. I think he had Cordarrelle Patterson. I think that is the only change though. So Pat's going with the 10 personnel this week, so going quite spread there with the one running back and the 4 wide receivers. The history of this matchup all time, Gridiron Gang is 8-2 against Pakistan, so Pat does typically struggle against my team. Let's take a look down here though. So for my team, Josh Allen, obviously he's been great all year long for me. He will be playing in a very cold game and a very quite windy game as well. I don't love it, if I'm being completely honest, but obviously Josh Allen gets some value with his legs as well, so I'm hoping whatever he might lose from being slightly dodgier in the passing game, he would gain, obviously, with his legs. We've got Travis Kelce against Seattle. Seattle suck against tight ends. I have a feeling Kelsey's not been firing as much as he had been of late. I don't know if teams are just locking him on him more and forcing the Chiefs to go other places. It's not necessarily been working if you watch the Chiefs. But, you know, if this is going to be one game that Kelsey could blow up, and it's certainly this one with that bad matchup. Terry McLaurin against San Fran. It's a tough defense, but receivers have been the Achilles heel of that defense. Maybe because they're usually in a positive game strip and teams are having to pass and catch up. So we'll see. It's not the best on paper, but we just have to go with it from my side. Joe Mixon as well, again on paper, it's not the best matchup against New England. We saw Josh Jacobs got about 10 points against them last week. But I have a feeling, we know what Belichick does on defense. He likes to take away the team's best weapon. He likes to focus on an area and force them to beat you another way. If you're playing this Bengals team and the weather isn't meant to be too bad in New England, it's going to be a bit chilly, but not too bad. But if you're playing this Bengals team, your MO is to stop this passing game. It's to stop Jamar Chase and T. Higgins because they would just eat you alive every day. If Belichick does go that route, I think he will, because the Bengals haven't been a great running team this year. We all know that Mixon's been quite inefficient all year long. He's volumed his way to decent days. I think that could be another case here. They're going to dare Cincy to run it and use the running backs, I'm hoping anyway, to overcome the bad matchup and hopefully get them to a good performance there. But we'll obviously see when we get to it later. Kenneth Walker as well. I'll come back and do the injuries in the other game. Apologies, guys. I forgot to do that one. I'll go back and do that. But Kenneth Walker is a true questionable right now. I am so scared, even if he does suit up, about playing him, because he's questionable with this back spasms, which is not a nice injury and something you can't play through, and the ankle injury, which seems to have reared its head again potentially. He has not practiced all week, still expected to play. They've elevated 2 other running backs though. I don't know if that's maybe because DJ Dallas isn't quite ready to return or what, but it's scary because even if he does play, he might be limited. He might be there for emergency. He might suffer a setback in the game. On paper, it's a good matchup, and obviously Ken Walker was a large part of the reason my team was good. He hasn't been great of late either, and maybe it's because of some of these niggling injuries. I don't know. It's and I don't have a great option behind him either, so I'm really just crossing all my fingers that he has a decent day here. And Rashad White as well. Again, it's not a guy that I love playing. It seems that Fournette is maybe retaking the backfield again here, but for myself personally, I'm just hoping that maybe the Bucs will be leading in this game. Maybe because of that, they'll rest Lenny a bit more, have him fresher for the playoffs. Maybe they'll try and get Rashad White going a bit more, see what they have in the rookie. There is still a split that exists between these two here, and the matchup is very, very good. The Cardinals have been absolutely hemorrhaging production to running backs of late, so I'm just purely playing the matchup there in the absence of a better play. Jason Sanders against Packers there as well. I have not made a final decision on my kicker. Obviously, I've had Tyler Bass for most of the second half of the season, but in that bad weather game and that windy game, I don't want to double down on the Bills offense just in case something bad does happen. And the Broncos against the LA Rams, we all know Baker Mayfield sucks. He's been okay for them so far, I guess you could say, but I don't think he's faced as good a defense as he has in the Broncos. We all know the Broncos offense isn't great, so hopefully that they don't put them in some bad situations, but on paper it looks like a good matchup for them. Looking at the bench for me, as I say, I don't really have many options to go with. Piron's just a handcuff. Peoples-Jones I cannot play in that bad weather game. Then I've got guys like Tyler Algier and Brian Robinson, obviously the early down back for the Commanders. He's been good, but this does not profile as a good game against San Fran, the number one run D. You do not get production against them. He would need a touchdown to do anything. And Algier, he's in a committee. It helps that Caleb Huntley suffered a season injury last week, so he's more solidified in his role alongside Cordero Patterson. We know they like to run the ball, but they've got to stay in that game against Baltimore. But it's a tough matchup on paper. But as I said earlier, with talking about Ben's game, without Calais Campbell, does the matchup become a bit easier? I don't know. It's a real tough one. He might be the option for me if Kenneth Walker doesn't play. So it's definitely not lining up completely nicely for me. I'm going to need, I think, a couple of big performances, because I know among those players there's going to be some bad performances, I think, there. On the other side of the board for Pakistan, he's obviously got Justin Herbert against Indy. Again, on paper, that's a good matchup. Indy, I think they're missing Kenny Moore, their safety, so they're not completely healthy in the back end. Obviously, they just gave up that crazy comeback victory to the Vikings last week, so you would think the Chargers should be able to score some points in this one fairly easily. You've got Davante Adams there, who's a stud. He's used to those cold weather games, as I said. Carr historically does suck in the cold weather games. That is a real concern for Pat. But he's also not had a receiver as good as Adams in said games before, so maybe that helps to offset it. The Steelers obviously aren't the worst matchup on paper, probably quite a good one, so he could have a good day there. Justin Jefferson as well. The Giants don't have great corners. I don't think Dory Jackson is back, so they should be able to be passed on there, and obviously Jefferson's just another worldly receiver, so he should have a good day. Zeke Elliott against the Eagles. They could be in a fairly good close game script, obviously with Jalen Hurts missing the game. The Eagles are fairly good against the run. That's the one concern for Pat, but it's pretty good measure for a touchdown on a given week as well. Devontae Smith against Dallas as well. They've obviously got Trayvon Diggs at the top, but you figure he'll be on AJ Brown. That could potentially let Devontae Smith eat, because the Cowboys have been a bit banged up in the secondary behind him, so he could be profiling for a real good day. Gardner Minshew, I don't think it's a drop off from Jalen Hurts, obviously, but we could see Gardner Minshew perform quite well in this offense with the weapons it has. The one worry for Pat will be Dallas Goedert. He should be coming back in this game. When he was healthy, Devontae Smith wasn't lighting up the scoreboard like it has been, but again, maybe the offense has changed. Maybe it's Goddard's first game back, so we don't know exactly what we're going to see from him. I didn't mention Pat has had to play a play which is leading his low projection. Garrett Wilson unfortunately only got 1 point for Pat, 30 yards and a fumble lost there on the Thursday night game in the bad weather, so that's an unfortunate bad start for Pat, but I think he can overcome it because he's got some guys that could really light up the scoreboard. Younghoe Koo as well, he's been a solid option. I mentioned that Baltimore Atlanta game could be a gritty low scorer, so he could get quite a good amount of field goals there, especially with Atlanta maybe struggling to punch the ball into the end zone. And then Browns against New Orleans. New Orleans have been hemorrhaging points to defenses all the year long. The Browns defense isn't the best on paper. They're also not good against the run, where the weather is going to be bad. Maybe they stack the box a bit more, and it's obviously going to be quite hard to pass in the climate, as I said in the preview of the other game. And obviously when the weather is that bad, it creates the opportunity for some good opportunities for defenses to do something crazy, so that could be a real good play there for Pat as well. Where am I going in this game? Despite the really bad projection, I think I'm going to pick Pat's team, and it breaks my heart to say that because I've got some really good players on my team, but I think I need my good guys to have great days to carry me, and I'm just not convinced that they will. There's some risk with some of the players that a lot of the players that I'm playing really, and I don't know. Even though Pat's kind of had a slower start with the 1 point, some of the players he's got are just great. A lot of them are playing in domes as well, or in favourable conditions. So yeah, I'm just going to pick Pat's team here. I'd love it to see Pat obviously in his first Corona Bowl. That'd be great to see after making the Corona Bowl. Making the playoffs three times. And yeah, that's why it's going to be an interesting game to watch. So that's all I'm going to say. So that brings us to the end of the semi-final preview show. So yeah, obviously it's the Christmas Eve edition of the pod. I hope you have a fantastic Christmas. But I would like to wish a special happy Christmas and happy travels to Chris and his wife Lux as well. Sure, I speak for all of us here at the LOC Report and in the LOC that, you know, we love having Chris on the pod. He brings great commentary. The shows are immediately better when I have a co-host, certainly when it's as good as Chris. He won't be making any more appearances as he starts his grand travels around the world on Christmas Day. So yeah, just very much wish for you, Chris, to have a great time on your travels. Have a good Christmas, everybody. Have a good weekend. It is the weekend of well, of course. Enjoy the NFL. Good luck in your fantasy matchups, unless you're playing me, of course. Though I would like to see us both do well. But have a good one, guys.